It's time to get unstuck. Do you love listening to this podcast? I'd love to have you give me a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. And if you'd like to help me keep the lights on, I'd appreciate a donation. You can do that at livingmoonmeditation.com/podcast. Are you tired of feeling stuck? Let's shift your energy. Start with my free quiz I made just for you. You'll get personalized tips for getting unstuck based on where your blocks are. You can find it at bit.ly/getunstuckchakraquiz. I have the link in the show notes for you. Imbolc is an ancient pre-Christian fire festival that marks the halfway point between the winter solstice and spring equinox. Today, Imbolc is celebrated mostly on February 1st or 2nd, but in ancient times it was not marked on a set calendar day. Instead, if Imbolc was marked, it was done when the first lambs were born, or on the full moon after the birth of the first lambs. I tend to go with February 1st at sunset through the same on February 2nd. The word Imbolc derives from the Irish Gaelic word that means ewe's milk. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce that word because I can't. I'm not your girl for Gaelic pronunciation, but you can feel free to look that shit up online if you want to. The theme of Imbolc is the coming of spring. It's not here yet, but there are beginning to be signs that it is on the way. It's about the hope of spring coming. You may be seeing signs of plant life. If you're farther north, you can see the lengthening of days. Because I live in the United States, I'm speaking of the northern hemisphere here. Of course, for those of you in the southern hemisphere, you would be marking Imbolc at the beginning of August. So feel free to save this episode until then. Because Imbolc was a day marking the birthing of lambs, it is always appropriate to celebrate with milk and cheese. But if you're vegan or lactose intolerant, never fear. You can use lots of spices in your Imbolc meal to invoke the warmth of the sun, and there are lots of non-food ways to mark the day as well. The intent of the day in modern times is just as important as that in ancient times. Candles in the sun play an important role in Imbolc, so get lighting. If you're into honoring goddesses, Bridget is the one for Imbolc. In the pre-Christian Celtic world, celebrants would honor Bridget at Imbolc by creating dollies to represent the goddess, as well as with bonfires in her honor. If you want some of the deets on Bridget, check out the sources in the show notes that I have for you. Where I currently live, February is one of the harshest winter months, and we sometimes have lots of snow this time of year. It certainly doesn't feel like spring is coming. And I use candles in all of my magic. I'm Jewish and we're big on candles. Plus, most of my spells involve candles. So I like to go out in the snow when we have it at Imbolc and trace the image of the sun into the snow. Now, because Imbolc marks the coming of new beginnings, it's a time for initiations. Many covens have initiations at Imbolc, but if you're a solo practitioner, or if you don't practice the craft at all, you can initiate yourself into a deeper self-care practice. And speaking of self-care at Imbolc, I've already mentioned that Imbolc marks the coming of spring. And while you might notice some early signs in the wild, depending on where you live, most everything happening in the world of plant rebirth is currently happening underground. It's likely that you're starting to have ideas popping up in your mind, though, and you may get the seed of a new project come to you in a dream. Imbolc and the time surrounding it is a great time for creativity to spark because we're popping back after a season of dormancy. Self-care at this time of year takes the form of nourishing our physical bodies in preparation for the upcoming winter months. But it's also a good time to remember to take care of yourself in terms of all those ideas that you're having. Just because you're getting your creative edge back doesn't mean you have to jump into things full force. We can be gentle and intentional with our ideas. When something comes to mind, there's no need to go with it full throttle because that can lead to burnout. And I know that I have tons of ideas popping at this time of the year. Now, I like to write those ideas down as they come to me. That way I don't forget them. But also it allows me to pick and choose what I want to work on. So I get all these ideas. I keep a master list of everything that's coming to me. And then I go over that list and pick one or two things to work on. And then I work on that. And when that's done, then I go back to my list and pick another one or two things to work on. But I'm constantly adding to that list as things pop into my mind. And that's how I do self-care for creativity, because otherwise I'm just bombarded with so many things, and I start thinking I have to do all these things before I forget about them, and then nothing ever gets done, and then I feel like a failure for not getting anything done, and it's just a total nightmare. So that's what I do. So it's all about intentionality. Don't feel like you need to force anything. While you're nourishing your physical body, whether that's with milk baths or long daily walks, let your mind wander and see what comes up for you. And if you don't feel like celebrating Imbolc at all, that's okay too. We're talking about self-care here. So you do you, boo. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Get Unstuck with Michele Leffler. It's truly been my pleasure to talk to you today. If you like this episode or you think it will be useful for someone else, please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast app. If you've got any questions, send me an email to hello@livingmoonmeditation.com. Here's to getting you unstuck so you can be grounded, joyful, and energetic. See you next time.